I lost $455,000 of my pension to my wife's sister's cosmetic surgery addiction. Not all at once. Not in some dramatic moment where I wrote a check and handed it over. It happened in increments. Small transfers that felt reasonable at the time. Emergency requests that seemed urgent. Family obligations that I was told were non-negotiable in Thai culture. By the time I understood what was happening, Manthira's sister had a new face, new breasts, new everything, and I had nothing left. I'm 72 years old now. I worked as a dentist for 47 years. I spent nearly 5 decades looking into people's mouths, fixing their teeth, making them smile. I was good at it. I made good money. I saved diligently. I invested carefully. By the time I retired at 68, I had just over $500,000 sitting in various accounts. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Enough to live comfortably. Enough to travel. Enough to enjoy the years I had left without worrying about money. That was the plan anyway. My first marriage ended when I was 63. Carol and I had been together for 38 years. We had 2 children, both grown and living their own lives. The divorce wasn't dramatic. There was no infidelity, no big fight, no moment of crisis. We just woke up one day and realized we'd been living parallel lives for the better part of a decade. We were roommates who happened to share a last name. The divorce was amicable. We split everything down the middle. I kept the house, sold it a year later, and moved into a condo closer to my practice. For 5 years after the divorce, I focused on work. I took on extra patients. I did pro bono work at community clinics. I kept myself busy because the alternative was sitting alone in my condo watching television and feeling sorry for myself. My children visited occasionally, but they had their own families, their own problems. I understood that. I didn't want to be the needy father who demanded attention. So I worked, and I saved. And I told myself I was content. Then I retired. My partners bought out my share of the practice. The money was good. Combined with what I'd already saved, I was looking at a comfortable retirement. My daughter suggested I travel. She'd been to Thailand a few years earlier and loved it. She showed me photos of beaches and temples and street markets. It looked beautiful. It looked warm. It looked nothing like the cold, gray winters in Michigan. So I booked a ticket, 2 weeks in Thailand, Bangkok, Chiang Mai, and a few days on the islands, just to see what it was like. I arrived in Bangkok on a humid Tuesday afternoon in March. The heat hit me like a wall when I stepped off the plane. It was the kind of heat that makes your shirt stick to your back within minutes. But I didn't mind it. After months of freezing temperatures back home, it felt good. It felt alive. I took a taxi to my hotel in the Sukhumvit area. The driver spoke minimal English, but he was friendly. He pointed out landmarks as we drove. The traffic was insane. Motorcycles weaving between cars. Street vendors set up on sidewalks. Neon signs in Thai script that I couldn't read. It was overwhelming and exhilarating at the same time. I spent the first few days doing tourist things. I visited the Grand Palace. I took a boat tour of the canals. I ate street food that was better than anything I'd had back home. I wandered through night markets and bought things I didn't need just because the vendors were so friendly and persistent. It was during one of these wandering sessions that I met Manthira. She was working at a small cosmetic clinic in the Thonglor area. I'd walked past it twice before I noticed the sign in English advertising dental tourism services. As a dentist, I was curious. I went inside just to look around. The clinic was modern and clean, much nicer than I expected. Manthira was at the front desk. She greeted me with a smile that was professional but warm. She was 26 years old, though I didn't know that at the time. She looked younger. She had long, dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She wore minimal makeup. She spoke excellent English with a slight British accent that I found charming. We talked for nearly an hour. I told her I was a dentist. She told me she coordinated services for international patients. The clinic offered everything from dental work to plastic surgery to wellness treatments. She explained the pricing structure, the quality of the surgeons, the aftercare protocols. I wasn't there for any procedures. but I was impressed by her knowledge and professionalism. Before I left, she gave me her card and suggested I come back if I wanted a tour of the surgical facilities. I said I would think about it. I went back 2 days later. This time, she gave me a full tour. The operating rooms were state of the art. The equipment was as good as anything I'd worked with in the States. We talked more. She asked about my career. I asked about hers. She told me she'd studied hospitality management but found the hotel industry exhausting. The clinic was better hours, better pay, and she enjoyed helping people feel confident about themselves. There was something genuine in the way she spoke. She wasn't trying to sell me anything. She was just talking to me like I was a person, not a potential client. It was refreshing. Before I left Bangkok for Chiang Mai, I asked if she wanted to have dinner. She hesitated. For a moment, I thought I'd crossed a line, but then she smiled and said yes. We met at a restaurant near her apartment. It was a small place, the kind of spot tourists never find. She ordered for both of us in Thai. The food was incredible. We talked for 3 hours. She told me about growing up in Bangkok. Her father had left when she was young. Her mother worked as a seamstress. She had a younger sister who was studying at university. She'd worked hard to get where she was. She was proud of what she'd accomplished. I admired that. I admired her. I extended my trip. Instead of 2 weeks, I stayed for a month. I saw Manthira almost every day. We went to temples and parks. We took a weekend trip to Ayutthaya to see the ruins. She showed me parts of Bangkok I never would have found on my own. We ate at street stalls where she translated the menu. She laughed at my attempts to speak Thai. I'd spent most of my adult life in the same routine: work, home, sleep, repeat. Being with her felt like waking up from a long sleep. I felt useful again. I felt seen. Looking back now, I can identify the exact moment I decided to stay in Thailand. It was during that weekend in Ayutthaya. We were walking through the old temple grounds at sunset. The light was golden. The ruins were beautiful. Manthira was taking photos with her phone. She turned to me and said something I'll never forget. She said I was different from other Farangs she'd met. She said most Western men in Thailand were either running from something or looking for something they couldn't find in their own countries. But I seemed content. I seemed like I knew who I was. It was a compliment. I took it as one. But she was wrong. I was running. I was running from the emptiness of my life back home. I just didn't realize it yet. When my visa was about to expire, I didn't want to leave. Manthira suggested I extend it. She knew an agent who could help. The process was surprisingly easy. I got a 60-day extension, then another. I moved out of my hotel and rented a condo in the same building as Manthira, not the same unit. I didn't want to be presumptuous, but close enough that we could see each other easily. The rent was cheap by American standards, less than $1,000 a month for a modern one-bedroom with a balcony and a view of the city. I thought about what I was paying in property taxes back home, and it felt absurd. Manthira and I became a couple. It happened gradually. There was no official conversation. We just started spending every evening together. She'd come to my place after work. We'd cook dinner together or order takeout. We'd watch movies with Thai subtitles. She'd curl up next to me on the couch, and I'd feel something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Contentment. The sense that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I met her family 3 months after we started dating. Her mother lived in a small house in the Minburi district. It was about an hour from my condo by taxi. The house was modest. Concrete walls, tile floors, a small yard with plants in pots. Her mother was shy at first. She didn't speak English. Manthira translated everything. I brought gifts. Fruit, flowers, a bottle of whiskey for the neighbors who'd gathered to meet me. It felt like I was being presented to the village, even though we were technically still in Bangkok. Everyone was friendly. Everyone smiled. I felt welcomed. Manthira's sister was there too. Her name was Palin. She was 22. She was studying business administration at Ramkhamhaeng University. She was pretty in a way that seemed effortless. Long hair, clear skin, a bright smile. She was more outgoing than Manthira. She asked me questions about America. She wanted to know about Hollywood and New York and whether I'd ever met anyone famous. I told her I'd lived in Michigan my whole life, and the most famous person I'd ever met was a local news anchor. She found that hilarious. The visit went well. Manthira's mother seemed to approve of me. Before we left, Manthira pulled me aside and explained that in Thai culture, it's customary to give money to the parents when you visit. Not a lot, just something to show respect. I gave her mother 2,000 baht, about $60. She accepted it with both hands and a slight bow. Manthira squeezed my hand in the taxi on the way home. She told me I'd done everything right. She told me her family liked me. I felt proud. I felt like I was part of something. That was when the financial requests started. They were small at first. Subtle. Manthira mentioned that her mother needed dental work, a root canal. The quoted price was 15,000 baht, about $450. That was nothing compared to what it would cost in the States. I offered to pay. Manthira protested, but not very hard. She said it would mean a lot to her family. I made the transfer through the clinic. The money went directly to the dentist. I felt good about it. I was helping. I was using my resources to make someone's life better. That's what money was for, wasn't it? A few weeks later, it was Palin. She needed a new laptop for her studies. Her old one had crashed and she'd lost all her files. The university required specific software that only worked on newer computers. Manthira showed me the specs. It was a decent laptop. Not top of the line, but not cheap either. 25,000 baht, about $750. I bought it without hesitation. Palin sent me a video message thanking me. She was so grateful, so excited. She promised she'd work hard and make me proud. It felt good to be appreciated. Then there was the house repair. Manthira's mother's house had a leak in the roof. During rainy season, water was coming into the bedroom. It needed to be fixed before it caused structural damage. The quote was 40,000 baht, $1,200. I paid for it. I didn't even think twice. What was $1,200 to me? It was nothing. It was a rounding error in my pension account. But to Manthira's family, it was the difference between sleeping in a dry bed or waking up to water dripping on their faces. I want to be clear about something. At this point, I didn't feel like I was being taken advantage of. I felt like I was being generous. I felt like I was being a good partner. Manthira never directly asked me for money. She'd mention problems her family was having, and I'd offer solutions. That's how it worked. She'd say her mother was worried about something, and I'd say I could help. She'd thank me. She'd tell me I was too kind. She'd tell me her family was so lucky to have someone like me in their lives. I believed her. 6 months after we met, Manthira moved in with me. It made sense. She was spending every night at my place anyway. Her own condo was tiny and expensive. We could save money by sharing my place. Plus, I wanted her there. I wanted to wake up next to her every morning. I wanted to come home to someone. I'd spent 5 years living alone, and I was done with it. Having her there made the condo feel like a home instead of just a place I slept. That's when I made the decision that would eventually destroy me. I gave Manthira access to my bank account, not my main pension account. That still required my signature for any withdrawals. But I opened a Thai bank account and transferred $50,000 into it. I added her as a secondary account holder. The reasoning was practical. She knew how to navigate the Thai banking system better than I did. She could pay bills. She could handle everyday expenses. It was easier than me trying to figure out online banking with instructions in Thai. That account was supposed to be for our shared life. Groceries, utilities, entertainment, small emergencies. Nothing major. The transformation didn't happen overnight. That's the thing people don't understand when I tell this story. There was no single moment where Manthira changed from a loving partner to someone I didn't recognize. It was gradual, incremental, like water eroding stone. So slow that you don't notice it happening until there's a canyon where solid ground used to be. The first time I noticed something was off was about 2 months after she got access to the account. I checked the balance and saw we'd gone through $15,000. In 2 months, I asked Manthira about it. She pulled up a list of transactions on her phone. Groceries, yes. Utilities, yes. But also money transfers to her family. 5,000 here, 3,000 there. 2,000 for her sister's tuition. 4,000 for her mother's medical checkup. I was seeing numbers I didn't remember approving. She explained each one. Her mother had diabetes and needed medication. Palin's university had increased fees. There'd been a death in the extended family, and they'd needed to contribute to the funeral costs. Everything had a reason. Everything had a story. And the stories made sense. They were plausible. They were the kind of things families deal with. I came from a culture where we didn't talk about money with family, where asking for financial help was shameful. But Manthira explained that Thai families are different. Thai families support each other. If you have money and your family needs help, you help. That's just how it works. It's not charity. It's obligation. It's love. I told myself I understood. I told myself I was lucky to be part of a family that cared for each other like that. I transferred another $50,000 into the account. It was around this time that Palin started changing. She'd always been pretty, but suddenly she was beautiful. Her skin looked flawless. Her figure had changed. She'd always been slim, but now she had curves that seemed too perfect to be natural. I noticed during a family dinner at Manthira's mother's house. Palin was wearing a tight dress. She looked like she could be a model. I mentioned it to Manthira on the way home. I said her sister looked great. Manthira smiled and said Palin had been working out and taking better care of herself. I accepted that explanation. Why wouldn't I? 2 weeks later, Manthira told me Palin was having a minor medical procedure. Nothing serious. Just a small surgery to correct a deviated septum that was causing breathing problems. It was semi-urgent. The doctor had said it should be done sooner rather than later. The cost was 90,000 baht, about $2,700. I didn't even ask for details. I just transferred the money. Manthira thanked me. She said Palin would be so grateful. She said I was saving her sister from years of discomfort. Palin recovered quickly. Too quickly, I thought at the time. She was back to normal within a week. The surgery hadn't left any visible scars. Her nose looked the same to me. But what did I know? I was a dentist, not a rhinoplasty expert. I figured modern surgical techniques were just that good. A month later, there was another procedure. This time, it was described as a correction to the first surgery. Apparently, the initial procedure hadn't fully resolved the breathing issue. They needed to go back in and adjust something. Another 70,000 baht, about $2,000. I transferred it. I was starting to feel uneasy, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to seem cheap. I didn't want to seem like I was keeping score. That's what cheap Farangs did. That's what men who didn't understand Thai culture did. I was different. I was generous. I was family. The pattern continued. Every few weeks, there was a new expense. Manthira's mother needed new glasses, 3,000 baht. Palin needed dental work, ironic considering I was a dentist. But Manthira said Palin was embarrassed to have me do it. She wanted to go to a Thai dentist, 15,000 baht. The house needed a new water heater, 20,000 baht. Palin's university required a special textbook that was only available from overseas, 8,000 baht. Each request came with a detailed explanation. Each request seemed reasonable in isolation. But together, they were draining the account faster than I could keep track of. I was checking the balance every few days by this point. We'd gone through $70,000 in 6 months. That was more than I'd planned to spend in 2 years. I brought it up with Manthira. I tried to be gentle about it. I said I was happy to help her family, but we needed to slow down. We needed to budget better. We couldn't keep spending at this rate, she cried. She said she was so sorry. She said she felt terrible for burdening me. She said her family had just had a run of bad luck lately. Medical issues, unexpected expenses, things they couldn't control. She promised it would slow down. She promised she'd talk to her family about being more careful with money. She held my hand and looked at me with those big brown eyes and told me she loved me. She told me she didn't want my money. She wanted me. Just me. The money was just to help get through a difficult time. I believed her. Of course I believed her. When you're in love with someone, you want to believe them. You need to believe them, because if you don't, then what does that say about your judgment? What does that say about you? Things were quiet for about 3 weeks. No requests, no emergencies. Monthira was affectionate and attentive. We went on a trip to Krabi. We stayed at a nice resort. We spent time on the beach. We made love like we had when we first met. I thought we'd turned a corner. I thought the difficult period was behind us. I was wrong. The request came in October. Monthira sat me down one evening after dinner. She was nervous. I could tell because she kept touching her hair, which was something she did when she was anxious. She told me that Palin had been suffering from severe back pain for months. She'd been hiding it because she didn't want to worry anyone, but it had gotten so bad that she could barely sleep. She'd finally gone to a doctor. They'd done x-rays and MRIs. The diagnosis was complicated, something to do with her spine and posture. The doctor recommended surgery. It was expensive, 250,000 baht, about $7,500. I asked questions. I wanted to know more about the diagnosis. I wanted to see the medical reports. Monthira said Palin was embarrassed about her condition. She didn't want everyone knowing the details. She trusted the doctor. He was one of the best orthopedic surgeons in Thailand. The surgery needed to happen soon, or the condition would worsen. Possibly permanently. I hesitated. $7,500 was a lot. It would eat significantly into our shared account. But what was I supposed to do? Let Palin suffer? Let her potentially become disabled because I was too cheap to help. I made the transfer. Monthira hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. She told me I was an angel. She told me Palin would never forget this. She told me her family would be grateful forever. Palin had her surgery a week later. Recovery took about 2 weeks, according to Monthira. I didn't see Palin during that time. Monthira said she was staying with a friend who could help take care of her. That made sense. You need someone around after a major surgery. When I finally saw Palin again at a family gathering, she looked amazing. Better than before, actually. She was moving fine, no signs of pain. She thanked me profusely. She hugged me. She told me I'd changed her life. I should have felt good about that. I should have felt like I'd done something meaningful. But I didn't. I felt strange. Something didn't sit right. The surgery had been described as major spinal surgery, but she'd recovered so quickly. She showed no signs of stiffness or limited mobility. She was wearing a tight shirt and jeans. She looked like a completely healthy young woman who'd never had back problems in her life. I pushed the thought away. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself modern medicine was just that advanced. People recovered from surgeries much faster these days. I was thinking like an old man who'd trained decades ago, when procedures were more invasive and recovery times were longer. This was Thailand. They specialized in medical tourism. Of course, their techniques were cutting edge. The shared account was down to $18,000. I'd put in $100,000 over the course of a year, and we were down to 18. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I needed to have a serious conversation with Monthira about our finances. We couldn't continue like this. I was 70 years old. I couldn't work anymore. My pension was finite. If we kept spending at this rate, I'd be broke in 3 years. I sat Monthira down in November. I showed her the bank statements. I walked her through every transaction. I wasn't angry. I was just trying to be practical. I explained that we needed to make a budget and stick to it. No more family emergencies. No more medical procedures. We needed to live within our means. She listened quietly. When I finished, she nodded. She said she understood. She apologized again. She said things would change. But then she said something that should have been a red flag. She said her family had been through so much, and I was the only stable thing in their lives. She said they depended on me. She said I was like a father to them. The way she said it made me feel obligated, made me feel like pulling back would be cruel, would be abandoning them. I told her I wasn't abandoning anyone. I was just asking for us to be more careful. She agreed. She kissed me. We went to bed. I thought the matter was settled. December came. No emergencies. January, same thing. I started to relax. Maybe we really had turned things around. Maybe Munthira's family had found other sources of support. Maybe they'd cut back on their expenses. I stopped checking the account every day. I checked it once a week, then once every 2 weeks. In February, I logged in and nearly had a heart attack. The account was at $3,000. In 2 months, $15,000 had disappeared. I immediately called Munthira. She was at work. I told her we needed to talk immediately. She said she'd come home early. When she arrived, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open showing the bank statement. I wasn't calm anymore. I was angry. I asked her where the money had gone. She looked at the screen. She looked at me, and then she started crying, real heavy sobs. She told me Palin had needed another surgery, an emergency. Something had gone wrong with the previous procedure, and they'd needed to correct it immediately or risk permanent damage. I asked why she hadn't told me. She said she didn't want to burden me. She knew I was stressed about money. She thought she could handle it. She'd used the money from the account and planned to replace it from her salary. But her salary wasn't enough. She was sorry. She was so sorry. I wanted to believe her. Part of me still wanted to believe her, but I couldn't anymore. Too many surgeries, too many emergencies, too many things that didn't add up. I told her I needed to see Palin's medical records, all of them, from every procedure. I told her I was a medical professional and I could verify whether these surgeries were legitimate. Munthira's face changed. The tears stopped. Her expression hardened. She told me I was being disrespectful. She told me I was accusing her family of lying. She told me that in Thai culture, you trust your family. You don't demand proof. You don't treat them like criminals. She said if I couldn't trust her, then maybe we didn't have a relationship worth saving. It was a threat, a clear one. Trust me without question, or we're done. Looking back, I should have called her bluff. I should have demanded answers. But I was 70 years old, and I was terrified of being alone again. Terrified of going back to my empty life in Michigan. So I backed down. I apologized. I said I was just worried about our future. She softened. She hugged me. She told me everything would be okay. But everything was not okay. I knew it. She knew it. We were both pretending. I made a decision that night. I changed the banking permissions. I removed Munthira as a secondary account holder. I told her it was for tax purposes. Some nonsense about American reporting requirements for foreign accounts. She didn't seem happy about it, but she didn't fight me on it. I also transferred most of my remaining pension money out of that account and into a separate account she didn't have access to. I left $20,000 in the shared account for genuinely shared expenses. It was my line in the sand. For a few months, things stabilized. We used the shared account for groceries and bills just like we were supposed to. Munthira seemed different, though, more distant, less affectionate. She spent more time with her family, more time on her phone. When I asked if something was wrong, she said she was just tired from work. I didn't push it. In May, almost exactly 1 year after I'd given her access to the original account, she told me we needed to talk about something serious. She sat me down. She held my hands. She told me that Palin was suffering from severe self-esteem issues. The back surgery had helped her physical pain, but she was deeply unhappy with her appearance. She'd been bullied in school for years about her looks. She'd developed depression. She'd even had suicidal thoughts. The only thing that would help was cosmetic surgery. A proper comprehensive treatment plan. Multiple procedures over several months. It would cost 600,000 baht, about $18,000. I stared at her. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Then I asked the question I should have asked months earlier. I asked if any of Palin's previous surgeries had actually been medical procedures or if they'd all been cosmetic. Manthira didn't answer right away. She looked down at our joined hands. Then she said, "Does it matter?" She said her sister needed help. She said Palin's mental health was at stake. She said cosmetic surgery wasn't just vanity. For some people, it was life-saving. It gave them confidence. It gave them hope. It allowed them to live full lives instead of hiding from the world. I told her I wasn't going to pay for cosmetic surgery. I told her I'd been generous with medical expenses, but this was different. This was elective. This was unnecessary. She let go of my hands. She stood up. She told me I didn't understand. She told me I was selfish. She told me I had so much money, and I was willing to let her sister suffer rather than share a tiny portion of it. She said I didn't love her. I loved my money more than I loved her. We fought for hours. It was the first real fight we'd had. I held firm. I said no. She slept on the couch that night. The next morning, she was cold and formal. She spoke to me only when necessary. This went on for days, then weeks. The apartment felt like a tomb. I was miserable. She was miserable. But I wasn't going to give in. Not on this. Then in June, her mother called me. Manthira must have given her my number. Her mother spoke through a translator app on her phone. The robotic voice told me that Palin had tried to hurt herself. She'd taken pills. They'd found her in time and taken her to the hospital. She was okay physically, but she needed psychiatric care. The family was desperate. They were afraid. They needed help. They needed money for treatment. They needed me. I felt sick. I felt guilty. Had I driven a young woman to attempt suicide by refusing to pay for surgery? Was I that cruel? That selfish? I called Manthira. I told her I'd pay for Palin's psychiatric treatment, whatever she needed, therapy, medication, hospitalization if necessary. But I wanted to speak to the doctors directly. I wanted to understand the treatment plan. I wanted to make sure the money was going where it was supposed to go. Manthira said that would be difficult. The doctors didn't speak English well. And Palin was embarrassed. She didn't want me involved in her mental health treatment. It was too personal, too private. But if I transferred the money, Manthira would make sure it went to the right place. She promised. She swore on her mother's life. I didn't transfer the money. Instead, I told Manthira I wanted to visit Palin in the hospital. I wanted to see her. I wanted to talk to her doctors myself, even if I needed a translator. If Palin's mental health was really at stake, I needed to understand the situation properly. Manthira said no. She said Palin didn't want to see me. She said I'd already done enough damage. That's when I knew. That's when I finally understood. There was no suicide attempt. There might not have even been depression. It was all a story, all a manipulation. All designed to make me feel guilty enough to hand over $18,000 for cosmetic procedures that Palin wanted but didn't need. I told Manthira to leave. I told her I knew what was happening. I told her I wasn't stupid. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She just looked at me with something like pity and said I'd never understand Thai families. She said I'd never understand what it meant to struggle. She said I'd had everything handed to me my whole life, and I couldn't comprehend what it was like to watch your family suffer when a solution was right there. She said the money I'd given her family had changed their lives. Her mother had dental implants. Palin looked beautiful for the first time in her life. Those weren't bad things. Those were good things. I'd made them possible. I should be proud. I asked her directly. I asked her how much of the money I'd given her over the past year had actually gone to medical procedures versus cosmetic surgery. She thought about it. Then she said probably about 60% cosmetic, 40% medical. Maybe 70-30. She wasn't sure exactly. It didn't matter, though, because all of it had been necessary. All of it had been important. All of it had improved someone's life. I asked her to leave again. She packed her things. It took her about 2 hours. She'd accumulated a lot of possessions during our time together. Clothes, makeup, electronics, jewelry. Things I'd bought her. Things she'd bought with money from our shared account. She put everything in 3 large suitcases and called a taxi. Before she left, she turned to me and said she'd loved me. She said I'd been good to her. But I was like all farangs. I thought money could buy happiness, but I was too scared to actually spend enough of it to find out if that was true. Then she left. I sat in the empty apartment for the rest of the day. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there and tried to process what had happened. I'd given Munthira and her family over $80,000 in 1 year. Probably closer to 90,000 when I factored in the gifts, the dinners, the trips, all the small expenses that hadn't come directly from the shared account. And most of it had gone to making Palin look like an Instagram model. Breast implants, probably. Maybe a nose job, though she'd always claimed it was for a deviated septum. Lip fillers. Skin treatments. Whatever the trendy cosmetic procedures were that year. The truly pathetic part was that I'd seen it happening, and I'd convinced myself it wasn't. I'd watched Palin transform from a pretty college student to someone who looked like she belonged in a beauty pageant, and I'd accepted every explanation I was given. I'd ignored the obvious because the truth was too humiliating to accept. I'd been funding someone's vanity project while thinking I was being a generous partner and a good quasi-stepfather. I spent the next week going through every bank statement I could access. The shared account was easy to track. $93,000 had gone through it. But I'd also made direct payments for things. The laptop, the roof repair, the dental work for Munthira's mother. That might have been real, actually. I wasn't sure. When I added everything up, the number was closer to $108,000 in 1 year for a family I'd met 18 months ago. But that wasn't the full picture. I'd also been supporting Munthira directly, paying for our shared life. Rent, food, entertainment, travel. She'd contributed some from her salary, but I'd covered probably 70% of our expenses. I'd bought her gifts. I'd taken her on trips. I'd paid for nice dinners and concerts and weekend getaways. When I factored all of that in, the number climbed to about $150,000. $150,000 in 18 months. That was over $8,000 per month. That was more than most people's annual salary. And I'd spent it trying to keep a woman 26 years younger than me happy, while her family systematically bled me dry under the guise of medical emergencies. I found out the full extent of the cosmetic surgery situation through a mutual friend, a woman I'd met at an expat gathering months earlier. She'd seen Palin's Instagram account. Palin wasn't hiding what she'd done. She posted before and after photos. She tagged the clinic. She talked about her transformation journey. She thanked her family for supporting her. She had thousands of followers. She'd become a minor influencer in the Thai beauty community. People commented asking where she'd had her procedures done. She replied with recommendations. She posted discount codes. She was making money off her new appearance. Money that I'd paid for. The clinic she used was the same one where Munthira worked. That's how I knew she'd gotten deals. Employee discounts, maybe even free procedures in exchange for promotion. Munthira had access to everything. She knew the surgeons. She knew the pricing. She probably knew exactly how to describe cosmetic procedures in ways that sounded medical enough that I wouldn't question them. A boob job became a correction for back problems. A rhinoplasty became treatment for a deviated septum. Lip fillers became some vague dental-related procedure. I looked at Palin's Instagram photos and I felt nauseous. She looked beautiful. Objectively, genuinely beautiful. But every curve, every perfect feature, every flawless angle represented money I'd worked decades to earn. Money I'd saved for my retirement. Money that was supposed to last me the rest of my life. And I'd handed it over because a pretty girl cried and told me I was her hero. I had to decide what to do next. I was 70 years old. I was living in Thailand on a retirement visa. I'd just been massively betrayed by someone I'd trusted completely. I had about $340,000 left in my pension accounts. That sounds like a lot. but it had to last potentially another 15 or 20 years. And I'd already learned that money disappeared fast in Thailand when you weren't careful. I could stay and try to rebuild my life here, or I could go back to the States and start over. I stayed for another 4 months. I told myself I was tying up loose ends, finishing my visa term, figuring out logistics, but really I was just avoiding the reality of going home. Going home meant admitting defeat, meant admitting I'd been scammed, meant facing my children and explaining why I'd given $150,000 to a woman they'd warned me about. They'd never met Manthira, but my daughter had asked pointed questions on our video calls. She'd asked how old Manthira was. She'd asked if Manthira worked. She'd asked if I was being careful with my money. I'd told her not to worry. I'd told her I knew what I was doing. I'd been defensive and dismissive of her concerns. Now I'd have to admit she'd been right. During those 4 months, Manthira contacted me 3 times. The first time was 2 weeks after she left. She texted saying she'd left some things at the apartment and wanted to pick them up. I told her to take everything she wanted and leave her key when she was done. She came when I wasn't there. The second time was a month later. She texted asking if we could talk. She said she missed me. She said she'd been thinking about us. I didn't respond. The third time was 3 months after the breakup. She called. I answered. She told me Palin was sick again. She needed medication. Could I help one more time? Just a small amount. 30,000 baht. I hung up. She didn't contact me again. I left Thailand in October. I sold most of my furniture. I donated my clothes. I packed what little I wanted to keep into 2 suitcases. I flew back to Detroit. My son picked me up from the airport. He didn't ask questions during the drive to his house. I stayed with him and his family for 2 weeks while I found an apartment. A small 1-bedroom in a building full of other retirees. The rent was more than I'd paid in Bangkok for something half the size. The view was of a parking lot. The walls were thin. I could hear my neighbors' televisions at night. I got a part-time job at a dental clinic doing administrative work. I couldn't afford not to. My pension wasn't going to stretch as far as I'd planned. I needed supplemental income. The job was humiliating. I was 71 years old. I was filing paperwork for dentists half my age who probably earned in a month what I'd earned in a year at the peak of my career. But I needed the money. So I smiled and did the work and pretended I didn't feel like a failure. My children were supportive but confused. They didn't understand why I'd given so much money to Manthira's family. I tried to explain the cultural obligations. I tried to explain how it had seemed reasonable at the time, but saying it out loud made me realize how ridiculous it sounded. No one forced me to transfer those funds. No one held a gun to my head. I'd done it willingly because I was lonely and desperate to be loved and too proud to admit I was being used. I found out through that same expat friend that Manthira had a new boyfriend within 3 months of our breakup. Another American, older than me, which I didn't think was possible. He'd apparently just sold his business and moved to Thailand with close to $1 million. The friend sent me a photo from Facebook. Manthira and the new guy at a fancy restaurant. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before. Designer, probably. She looked happy. He looked besotted. I recognized the expression. I'd worn it myself. I wondered how long it would take before his money started flowing to her family. I wondered if Palin would need more procedures. Maybe her younger cousin would suddenly develop medical issues. Maybe the family home would need a new roof again. I considered reaching out to him, warning him, but what would I say? I'm the ex-boyfriend, and I'm here to tell you that your girlfriend is using you for money. He wouldn't believe me. He'd think I was bitter. He'd think I was jealous. He'd make the same choice I made. He'd choose to believe her over me because the alternative was too painful. I think about Manthira sometimes. Not often anymore, but sometimes. I think about whether she ever actually loved me or if it was all calculated from the beginning. I think about that first conversation at the clinic. Had she spotted me as a target immediately? Older Western man, traveling alone, clearly retired with money to spend. Had she decided right then that I was worth pursuing? Or had there been genuine affection that later transformed into opportunism? I'll never know. And at this point, it doesn't matter. What hurts isn't the money. I mean, the money hurts. $150,000 hurts. But what really hurts is knowing that I was so desperate for companionship that I willingly ignored every warning sign. My daughter's concerns, my friend's subtle hints, the obvious discrepancies in Manthira's stories, the rapid transformation of Palin from ordinary college student to cosmetic surgery showcase. I saw all of it. I knew something was wrong, but I chose not to see it because seeing it would mean being alone again. I'm 72 now. I work 3 days a week at a job I hate. I live in an apartment that depresses me. I have enough money to survive, but not enough to enjoy my retirement the way I'd planned. I can't travel. I can't help my grandchildren with college funds. I can't be generous with my children the way I wanted to be, because I gave that generosity to strangers who saw me as a resource, not a person. Here's what I learned, and I'm telling you this because I don't want you to make the same mistake I did. Medical emergencies in Thailand, especially ones that require immediate large sums of money, are often not what they seem. If someone you've been dating for less than a year starts having family member after family member develop conditions that require expensive procedures, you're being scammed. If those family members recover suspiciously quickly from supposedly major surgeries, you're being scammed. If you're not allowed to speak directly to doctors or see medical reports, you're being scammed. And more broadly, if you're an older Western man in a relationship with a much younger Thai woman and money is flowing primarily in one direction, think very carefully about what you're actually getting in return. I'm not saying all cross-cultural relationships are scams. I'm not saying all Thai women are gold diggers. I'm saying that if you're 60 or 70 and she's in her 20s, and you have money and she has family with endless needs, you need to be honest with yourself about the dynamic. Love doesn't feel like an obligation. Love doesn't come with a constant flow of financial emergencies. Love doesn't involve one person systematically extracting resources from another under the guise of cultural duty. If your partner makes you feel guilty for having boundaries around money, that's not love. That's manipulation. I wish I'd understood that a year ago. I wish I'd listened to my daughter. I wish I'd asked to see those medical reports. I wish I'd looked at Palin's Instagram account 6 months earlier. I wish I'd done a lot of things differently. But I didn't. And now I'm here, working at 72 to make up for the money I gave to fund someone's cosmetic transformation. The hardest part is knowing that somewhere in Bangkok, Palin is taking selfies and getting compliments on her appearance, and she's probably not thinking about me at all. Why would she? I was just the funding source, the ATM with feelings, the old foreign man who was so desperate to be part of a family that he paid $100,000 for the privilege of thinking he mattered. I matter to my real family, my children, my grandchildren. I should have spent that money on them, on their futures, on creating memories together. Instead, I spent it trying to buy love from people who saw me as a transaction from day one. If you're reading this and you're in a similar situation, get out now. I don't care how much you've already invested. I don't care how much you think you love her. I don't care how good it feels to be appreciated. Get out before you end up like me, starting over at 72 with half the money you should have and twice the regret. The money is gone. I'll never get it back. Cosmetic surgery isn't reversible just because it was funded under false pretenses. There's no legal recourse. No way to prove that Manthira misrepresented the purpose of the funds, because technically she never put anything in writing. It was all verbal, all trust-based, all designed specifically so that I'd have no way to fight back once I figured out the truth. I wake up every morning in my small apartment in Michigan, and I think about the life I could have had, the travel I could have done, the comfort I could have enjoyed, the help I could have given to my actual family. And then I think about Palin's perfect nose and enhanced figure, walking around Bangkok benefiting from my decades of work. And I feel a rage so deep and so useless that I have to sit down and wait for it to pass. This is what 72 looks like when you make the wrong choices, when you trust the wrong people, when you let loneliness override common sense. I'm not looking for sympathy. I made my decisions. I have to live with them. I'm just telling you what happened, so maybe you won't have to live with the same ones. Thailand didn't destroy me. My own desperation destroyed me. Manthira and her family just took advantage of what was already there. The need to be needed, the desire to be important, the fantasy that I could buy my way into a loving family. They saw that weakness, and they exploited it expertly. So yes, I lost $455,000 of my pension to my wife's sister's cosmetic surgery. But more accurately, I gave away $455,000 because I wanted to believe I was generous rather than admit I was being used. That's the real story. That's the truth I have to carry for whatever time I have left. And it's a heavy truth, heavier than I ever imagined it could be.